More specifically, what these drugs tell us. You're saying that it tells us something about ourselves that is other than what we have been told by the culture that has evolved. Do the drugs have a message in themselves? Is it a language? Is it a way of experiencing a potential in one's own imagination that has heretofore not been tapped? What?
Well, first of all, it's a gradient. I mean, whenever we have to talk pharmacology for a moment. Whenever you're talking about a substance or a drug, there's a curve of dose response. So let's just use psilocybin as an example. At low doses, psilocybin makes your vision clearer, makes you feel more robust, more interested in the exterior
Kind
world.
of like coffee or something.
On the edge of that, it stimulates. At higher doses, unusual thoughts begin to form, thoughts that you recognize as not your normal pattern of thinking and observing. At still higher doses, when you close your eyes, the normal orange or pale brown background behind your eyelids has been replaced by moving walls of color and pattern. At still higher levels, these moving walls of color and pattern become visions or hallucinations. They become recognizable visual scenarios. Well, anything like that is just flooding your mind with information. And these things have intimations of the distant past, the far future, alien connections of some sort. It's definitely magnifying our own set of cultural preconceptions and obsessions, but it's also putting information in there that we could not ordinarily imagine. And for me, the sine qua non of the psychedelic experience is when I look at the contents of my own mind and say to myself, I could not have imagined this. To me, that's the proof that some kind of communication is taking place. At a fairly heroic dose of psilocybin, a person lying in silent darkness has the impression that in a half an hour they're seeing more art of higher quality than the entire Western canon has produced in the last 1,000 years. And your little you, there in your trailer near Waco, or there in your teepee up near Sonoma, and yet this Niagara of alien and unpredictable beauty is pouring through your head. For artists, it's like a magic carpet. And the challenge, to my mind, after 30 years of being involved in all this, is to have the experience, to have it in an attitude of appreciation and calmness. But the second implication is somewhat political. It's to communicate the vision through words, through painting, through animation, because as we communicate it collectively, it will become real. This is what's happening on the Internet. In fact, the Internet is a perfect example of a psychedelic technology at the service of psychedelic goals. It's not something government ever intended to give to the people. It's not something big corporations called for in loud voices. It's something that hackers, freaks, and heads dreamed up, whipped up out of the existing tools of the culture, a word processor, the telephone lines, some communication switching equipment. So it's a kind of emergent technology that I think comes out of the depth of commitment to the psychedelic experience of the people in that field.
So, what I would like to ask you, you have made reference to the fact that other cultures have used these drugs, and that they've been integrated in the cultural life of shamans and holy people, etc. We've heard a lot about that, seen movies about it perhaps. And one of the things that I note you include as part of the project of this book, Invisible Landscape, is the I Ching, which is one of the oldest, as I understand, it's maybe the oldest book in the world, or one of the oldest things that we have preserved. It's from China, and it dates back, 5,000 or 6,000 years at least, something like that. How does that book come into the work that you've been doing?
Well, I've been fascinated by the I Ching since I was 13 or 14 years old. As you say, it's a method of Chinese divination that's very, very old.
How did you come to be interested in it at the age of 13 or 14? That seems unusual to me.
Well, I was a heavy reader, and I was interested in the psychology of Carl Jung, the Swiss depth psychologist. And he wrote...
As a 13-year-old.
As a 13-year-old. Well, I wasn't good at basketball. I had bad eyes. I couldn't catch any kind of round objects. So a sort of survival response was to hide out in the library. And it made me the freak I am today. But yes, the I Ching, people's involvement with psychedelics often takes them in some very personal and particularized direction. And for me, it took the form of a mathematical analysis of this ancient Chinese oracle. The ordinary notion with the I Ching is that you go through a process of sortilege, tossing coins or moving small sticks around, and you get a reading. One of 64 hexagrams will change into one of the other hexagrams, and this is accompanied by a reading. But these hexagrams occur in a fixed order traditionally, and I studied that for mathematical intent. In other words, I was interested in the question, is this traditional order of the hexagrams simply a jumble that's been preserved through tradition, or was there some mathematical reasoning behind it? And that's a pretty dry academic question, but as I got into it, I realized, or I became convinced, is I guess the way to put it, that there is a pattern inside the I Ching that actually pictures the ebb and flow in this world of ours of a quality which science does not recognize, Western science, a quality which in the East is called Tao, but which I chose to call, after Alfred North Whitehead, novelty. And it's an invisible something in the world which causes investments to succeed, movies to do well, relationships to flourish, or the opposite in its absence. And we can't see or feel this stuff in the world, but it builds things up and it tears them down at every level. Empires, whole species, relationships. It's happening on every level of time, and it can actually be pictured as a graph, like a stock market graph, novelty, ebbing and flowing. Well, to cut to the chase on this, the bottom line in this kind of thinking is the ability to predict not only the future, which is pretty much a fire-free zone, but also to predict the past, to lay these novelty graphs out over the past 2,000 years of invention, migration, pogrom, and so forth, and to see that when society is inventive, creative, productive, novelty is increasing, according to this mathematical theory. Similarly, societies that are restricting freedoms, very constipated, very restrictive in their approach to reality, these register on this graph as societies ruled by the opposite of novelty, which I call habit. So all of reality can be seen as a kind of dynamic struggle between habit and novelty, each trying to get the upper hand over the other, and this can all be mathematically modeled out of the I Ching. You see, the thing that's so puzzling to people about the I Ching is that it works, and yet it's as occult as the tarot or throwing the bones or any other of these contemptuously dismissed occult methodologies. But very scientifically minded people have been impressed by the fact that the I Ching works. So I set out to figure out why and how it worked, and I wrote about this in The Invisible Landscape and have published software, and it's my unique contribution to 20th century ideology. Psychedelics are advocated and defended by many people from many different perspectives, but I, so far as I know, am the only person who has built a complete edifice of explanations of nature, but honestly admitting that the foundations and the inspiration were psychedelic experiences.